Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a story that is absolutely captivating, but, well, profoundly tragic. We're looking at the life, the incredible mind, and the horrific death of the last great philosopher of antiquity. We're talking about a historical figure who stood right at the crossroads of eras, this really fleeting moment in history where classical enlightenment violently collided with the dawn of medieval dogma. It's a story of brilliance, power, and ultimately a stark warning from the past. Okay, let's dive right into it.
A beacon of reason extinguished by a mob. That right there is the central paradox we're exploring today. Imagine a mind so luminous, so incredibly bright, that it could literally pierce the encroaching shadows of an era teetering on the precipice of massive change. Hypatia really represented the pinnacle of classical thought. Now, imagine that same brilliant light being violently silenced, not by the slow decay of time, and not by some shifting academic consensus, but by the savage fury and brutal intolerance of a mob. That is the paradox of Hypatia. And honestly, understanding how a society gets to that point is absolutely crucial.
Section 1, Alexandria's brightest spark. Okay, let's travel back to the late 4th and early 5th centuries CE and get a feel for the incredibly vibrant world she inhabited. You see, Alexandria wasn't just any city in the ancient world. It was this massive cosmopolitan crucible, a pulsing metropolis, where Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Jewish cultures were constantly colliding and trading ideas. And at the absolute heart of this mixing pot was the Great Library. Even in its diminished state during this specific period, it was still the unquestioned intellectual epicenter of the ancient world. Into this incredibly dynamic environment, somewhere between 350 and 370 CE, the exact dates are a bit fuzzy, Hypatia was born. Her father, Theon, was a renowned mathematician, and he made sure she received a deeply rigorous education from a really young age. But here's the thing. She didn't just passively absorb these subjects. She completely mastered mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, rising to a level of unparalleled expertise. She was thoroughly prepared to absolutely dominate what was, let's face it, a highly male-centric intellectual world at the time. Now, the philosophy she championed was known as Neoplatonism. Basically, it was a complex school of thought synthesizing the ancient wisdom of Plato with mystical and spiritual elements, ultimately aiming for a higher understanding of the divine through sheer reason and contemplation. But the absolutely crucial point to understand about Hypatia is that she wasn't just sitting alone in a dusty room reading old scrolls. She was a phenomenally gifted orator. She took these highly complex abstract ideas out of the academic ivory tower and brought them right into the streets. She held accessible, deeply engaging public discussions. She spoke to scholars, hardened politicians, everyday citizens, drawing these vast crowds who were just completely captivated by her clear voice and her intellect. Section 2, the tangible and abstract. It's really vital to remember that Hypatia wasn't just a theorist living purely in her own head. And this brilliantly illustrates her genius because it had massive, real-world, physical implications. In the abstract realm, sure, she preserved and clarified wildly complex ancient texts. She wrote these deep, insightful commentaries on Ptolemy's Omagist, which was basically the foundational text for astronomy, and Apollonius's intricate work on conics. But practically, she is credited with incredible advancements to physical tools that actually changed how people interacted with the world. She improved the astrolabe, this sophisticated device used to measure the altitude of celestial bodies and navigate the stars. She also advanced the hydrometer, a tool for measuring the specific gravity and density of liquids. So she perfectly bridged the gap between understanding the vast theoretical order of the cosmos and building the actual tangible tools humanity needed to observe it. She was as much an engineer as she was a philosopher. Section 3, a city fractured. To truly understand the tragedy of Hypatia, we really have to grasp the unstable, rapidly changing environment around her. The Roman Empire was in a steady decline, and rising in its place, the Christian church was rapidly ascendant, transforming from historically persecuted sect into a dominant, highly organized, and sometimes intensely militant political power. At the absolute center of this political powder keg were three key figures. First up, we have Prefect Orestes, the Roman governor of the city. He's a man who deeply values reason, tradition, and above all, civic order. Because of this, he actively seeks out Hypatia's wise counsel to help him navigate the complexities of governing. Then, we have Bishop Cyril. He's the Bishop of Alexandria, and according to historical accounts, he's on a highly zealous pursuit of absolute power. Cyril views Hypatia, with her immense public influence and her pagan philosophy, as a massive obstacle to his ambitions. And caught squarely in the middle of this titanic struggle, Hypatia herself. She was recognized as a respected advisor and a vital voice of stability, but her intellectual independence and her public alliance with the civil authority placed a very real, very dangerous target directly on her back.
So as Roman civil authority continues to decline, it creates this vast power vacuum in Alexandria. Cyril capitalizes on this instability to rapidly consolidate Christian power under his own command. Naturally, this leads to Orestes and Cyril clashing directly over who truly controls the heart of the city. And this right here is where we reach the tragic turning point. When political maneuvering just wasn't enough, the narrative was violently manipulated by religious fervor. Hypatia, a philosopher who literally dedicated her entire life to seeking truth, was suddenly branded by Cyril supporters as a sorceress. The mind of the public was intentionally poisoned by fear, rumor, and intolerance. They transformed her from a brilliant intellectual into a feared pagan witch manipulating the governor. Section 4. The Fatal Ambush. We are now in March of 415 CE, and the climax of this escalating tension is a dark testament to the very depths of human brutality. The group responsible for what happened next were known as the Parabolani. Essentially, they were a militant monastic order of Christian zealots. While they were originally formed to care for the sick, over time they frequently acted as Bishop Cyril's personal violent enforcers in the streets. It was this specific, radicalized mob that lay in wait and ambushed Hypatia as she was simply making her way home in her chariot. The stark reality of what unfolded next is chillingly consistent across the historical accounts. Stripped, flayed with oyster shells, erased. They violently dragged her from her chariot and hauled her into the Caesareum church. They stripped her naked. And then, using sharp oyster shells or jagged shards of pottery, they literally flayed the flesh from her bones. They brutally dismembered her body, dragged her mangled remains through the streets to a place called Cineron, and burned them to ash. It was an act of unspeakable, calculated violence. It was designed not just to kill a human being, but to completely obliterate her, to erase her very existence and send a terrifying message to anyone who dared champion reason over dogma. Section 5. A timeless cautionary tale. So how do we process a historical event like this? Because this brutal murder wasn't just a spontaneous, random act of a rioting crowd. It was a highly calculated act of political and religious terror with macro-historical consequences. The historical impacts were immediate and they were devastating. In the short term, it resulted in the complete elimination of a powerful rival influence for Bishop Cyril. Plus, it served as the ultimate intimidation of the secular leadership. Governor Orestes was left entirely weakened and completely unable to protect the citizens of his own city. But looking at the bigger picture, her death was a profound symbolic turning point for Western intellect. It was a dark harbinger of the great library's eventual ruin and the fading of Alexandria's intellectual light. Hypatia's death starkly proved that religious power had finally eclipsed civil authority, paving the way for an era where free inquiry, scientific curiosity, and philosophical debate were increasingly stifled by rigid dogma. Which brings us to a final, deeply provocative question for you to ponder today. When the flames of intolerance rise, who protects the light of reason? You know, Hypatia's story is so much more than just a grim footnote in ancient history. It is a brilliant, tragic reminder of the enduring fragility of human knowledge. It shows us the terrifying dangers of unchecked extremism, and it highlights the immense courage required to simply stand up, ask questions, and seek the truth in an era of closing minds. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Think on this question, keep seeking out the truth, and I'll catch you next time.